So, um, hello everyone, and welcome to the Legal Education Day track organized by the Free Software Foundation Europe. So before we get started, I would like to do a quick rundown of what we are hoping to achieve today with this track. We at the Free Software Foundation Europe know that for many developers, understanding and complying with legal obligations can become a burden sometimes, and that is the reason why we decided to put together this series of short talks that hopefully will give you a better understanding of the importance of free software from a legal perspective. It will also help you to understand the importance of free software licenses and the obligations that these licenses put you under. So in today's sessions, we will explain the basic legal concepts that define and affect free software, such as licensing, copyright, and then we'll also delve into a more practical applications, such as the FSFE reuse initiative. So to very quickly go through the agenda for today, we will start with a short quiz to check the knowledge of our audience about legal aspects of free software. We will also talk very briefly about how free software affects human rights. We will then talk about what copyright is. We will discuss what a license is and what are the most commonly used licenses around the free software ecosystem. We will also discuss a little bit about legal license compatibility, some issues around that, and we will have a short explanation about trademarking your software project. We have then set up a more practical series of talks. So first we're gonna learn more about the European project Zoom, and then we're gonna delve into the FSFE reuse initiative, first with an introduction and then with a workshop in which we're gonna learn how to display legal information in a fun and easy way. So I would say let's get started. Thank you all for coming. And then for our first talk and for the short quiz, I would like to invite Niharika. Niharika is an IT lawyer and a legal researcher who works as a project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. She handles various legal and European Commission funded projects. So Niharika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lina. Hello, everybody. I am Niharika, and I work as a project manager at FSFE. So good to have you here. We are beginning with the quiz time. Great. So basically, we're having this quiz time to assess the basic understanding of free software amongst all of you. And this is also going to set the stage for the talks that we're going to have later during the day. OK, so the rules are simple. We're going to have 5 questions, and we'll have about 30 to 45 seconds to answer each one of them. And you could do so by a simple show of hands. We're just going to go the traditional way, right? So, test question. Which animal is your favorite? A, cat. Raise your hand if it's a cat. All right. OK. B, for a dog. Great. I like that enthusiasm, straight. So C, fish. Wow, I did not expect that, but that's great. All right, so I guess all of you now understand how this works. So let's move on to our first question. Which one of the following is a free software license? Is it A, GNU General Public License 3.0? Is it B, MIT License Expat? C, Apache License 2.0, or D, all of the above? So raise your hands for A. Raise your hands for B. C. And finally D. Amazing. Well, that is actually the right answer, and I'm so happy that all of you raised your hands on D, so great. Second question. Can free software be used for commercial purposes? A, no. It must be free of charge. B, no, it can only be used for charitable purposes. C, but you must pay before you can use free software. And D, yes, you can choose how you wish to use free software. So I'll just gonna repeat myself. Raise your hands for A, for B, for C, and for D. You guys make it so easy. All right. So the next question is, when does software become copyrighted? A, when you write the software. B, when you register the software with the authorities. C, when the first user of the software uses it. And D, when you make the first sale of the software. So raise your hands for option A. Raise your hands for option B. For option C. And for option D. That's amazing. I really like this audience. Yeah, so everybody actually has a fairly good idea about free software, and I'm really happy to know that. Next question is a software without a license free software? The options are no. Software without a license is in principle unshareable, as a full copyright applies. B, no. Software without a license belongs to the government. C, yes. The copyleft applies by default if there is no license. And D, yes, software is in the public domain if there is no license. So raise your hands for option A. Raise your hands for option B. For option C. And for option D. Well, okay. Well, the right answer is actually A. Software cannot, no software without a license is in principle unshareable, as full copyright applies. And if you're interested to learn more about it, we have a talk coming up next where we would give you more insight into what is copyright and, well, also more about licenses. So, well, that was quick, and I'm really happy to see that all of you really fairly understand the basics of free software. And this was just to gauge your understanding, and, well, a big round of applause to all of you then. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you very much, Niharika. I would like to know now if there are some questions from the audience so far about the legal track, about anything you're curious to know, or we will just have a short break until the next presentation. Nope, everything is clear. I'm so happy with this audience as well. Okay, then yeah, our next talk will start in around 6 minutes, so let's have a short break. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to the legal education track, and a little bit of context for those who just joined. We at the Free Software Foundation Europe have put together this series of short talks to spread basic legal education around free software. So for our next talk, we will explain how free software interacts with human rights law and enables society to enjoy rights. For this, I'm happy to invite Gabriel Kuwei-Bin. Gabriel is a senior legal project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. He's a former commercial and human rights lawyer, and he now manages the FSFE legal projects and activities. So without any further ado, the floor is yours, Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you, Lina, for that introduction. Yeah, as Lina mentioned, today I'll talk about how free software affects your fundamental rights. Yeah, so let's quickly go over what the agenda we have for this talk today. So first of all, I will deal with some definitions. What are human rights? You know, what is human rights law? We'll also take a look at the categories of human rights that we all enjoy. And yeah, we'll explore whether there are human rights relating to free software. And finally, we'll also talk briefly about how free software can affect or enable the enjoyment of our fundamental rights. So, what are human rights? So basically, human rights are the rights that every person enjoys intrinsically. Basically, that means that, you know, these are rights that you have by virtue of the fact that you're human. You know, you are born with these rights, you don't have to do anything to earn them, and they cannot be taken away from you except in certain exceptions that are provided for by the law. So this is the basic concept behind human rights, that everybody is born with them, that they're available to you intrinsically. And this concept is the basic foundation on which all human rights law is built upon. I mean, of course, you know, things get complicated down the line when we have to talk about things like how to balance one right against another, because, you know, people have different values, people put different values on different rights, and that's where all the disagreements on how to govern with human rights comes about. So, human rights are universal. Yeah, as I said, that means every person is equally entitled to enjoy these rights. And they're also inalienable. That means that they cannot be taken away from you or given away. So under human rights law, that means that they should not be taken away from you unless in accordance with certain acceptable procedures or situations. You know, for example, let's say you have the human right to liberty of movement or liberty and security of your person. But let's say you commit a crime and you're put in prison in accordance with the law. You've had a fair trial and you've been put in prison. So what happens now is your human right to liberty is being restricted, but that restriction itself is not a violation of human rights law because it's been done in accordance with certain procedures. Yes, as mentioned before, it's very difficult to balance these rights. How people choose to justify restricting a human right is always difficult. And so the exceptions under which your rights can be restricted is the basis of, like I said, every argument in human rights law. So what kind of rights do we have? It's a very complicated list, and it's a very long list, and I'm sure a lot of you have an idea already of what kind of rights you have under law. So to simplify things, I will just kind of categorize them into the two popular or two mainly understood categories of human rights law. Basically, these are your civil and political rights, as well as your economic, social, and cultural rights. Yes. So civil and political rights are basically the rights that ensure your ability to participate in civil society, yeah, without any discrimination or repression. So for your civil rights, you would have your things like your right to vote, your right to freedom of association, your right to be free from discrimination, and also things like free speech, freedom of religion and thought, et cetera, et cetera. And for political rights, these would be things like rights to a fair trial, rights to participation in civil society and political life. The other main category of rights would be your economic, social, and cultural rights. So yeah, these deal with rights that you need in order to enjoy a fulfilling life or or to be able to participate meaningfully in society and economically. So these would deal with things like, you know, your right to housing, your right to education, your right to health, your right to adequate standard of living, food and water, things like that. Right, so, you know, when we talk about human rights, it tends to concern itself a lot with very fundamental issues that go to the core of human beings being able to live a fulfilling life. So many of these rights and laws, they were drafted in times when, the most technologically advanced thing that people had in their houses was a radio. A lot of these human rights treaties were drafted after the Second World War, so the most important ones especially were drafted in 1962. So I would say, when these rights were kind of conceptualized, they were done in a time where, we had no idea, or humanity had no idea of the influence that, the internet, digital technology, software would have on our lives. Yeah. But I think that, even as the world changes, the core principles of what we as human beings are entitled to enjoy in order to have a fulfilling life, they remain the same. And we just have to figure out how to protect these core principles while we deal with the new challenges that digital technology brings with it. Yeah, and I say this because, a lot of modern life these days across the world depend on software. I mean, I think gone are the days where we can say that participation in the digital space, access to internet, that these are a privilege enjoyed by the developed world. I mean, even today we see now that these are essential things. The internet and software, these are essential things even in the developing world. And because so much of our lives depend on, the functioning of software, it is vital that we are guaranteed some kind of freedom over software and rights over software, over these tools that we see can essentially run aspects of our lives. These days, an individual's rights can be affected by how software operates, even if that individual chooses not to use software. So, how can free software support our human rights? Philosophically, I would say, we maintain our freedoms by maintaining control over our technology. Think of how pervasive software is in everyday life. We use it to work, we use it for entertainment, we use it even in our homes for everyday chores. You have software in your microwave, you have software in your washing machine these days, And if you do not have some kind of control or transparency over any particular piece of software, your rights can and in most cases will be affected in some way. And I think the biggest human right that people always think about when we think of digital technology is the right to privacy. That's a very big topic these days. We are all affected by the services of big tech these days. It's almost impossible to avoid its influence when you use the internet. And we live in economic systems where it's very profitable for a lot of these big companies to harvest and sell off your data. And of course, these actions violate your rights to privacy in the process. And so when you use proprietary software, you always run the risk that your rights are being forfeit in some way, especially the right to privacy. So if you use free software, how does that help with privacy then? So one major factor of free software is community management, community motivation, and dedication to ensure privacy. So we can see this happening in many free software communities. I mean, one example is in the early 2010s, you had the release of Ubuntu 12.10, which started establishing certain internet connections for local searches to the Amazon, to display Amazon ads and also to share data with Facebook and Twitter just by virtue of using that operating system. And the backlash from the community was immense because they could see these connections being made through the code. And it was such a massive backlash that Canonical, which is the company that develops Ubuntu, they had to respond and they ended up removing online searches and the Amazon web app. And more recently, the free software audio editor and recording app Audacity, they also received loads of backlash because they proposed adopting telemetry via the implementation of Google Analytics and Yandex to its software. So yeah, the outcry from the community was immense, and it eventually caused them to renounce their plans to do so. So why is this relevant? You know, so if you have the freedom to use to study and to use the source code and the freedom to improve on it, it means that the source code is decentralized and you do away with single points of failure or massive data breaches. And you also have a larger community acting as kind of a watchdog over the software, over what the code can and cannot do to its users to violate their rights to privacy. And yeah, from these examples that I've raised, you know, what we can see is that real privacy solutions must start with free software. So another example, you know, think of your right to vote. Imagine if your country switches over from paper voting to voting machines. Yeah, I mean, we just saw an election in the United States where a lot of states used voting machines to record votes from voters. So would you be comfortable if you had the knowledge that these voting machines were being run on proprietary software, that you have no access to the source code and you can't see exactly what the code is doing to your vote? I mean, you have no kind of ability to confirm whether or not the machine is intentionally or accidentally through badly programmed code. You know, if it's actually changing your vote, if it's not recording your vote properly, or if it's not communicating your vote, you know, to a server where it's being counted, or etc. You know, what happens if something is written into the code to discount your vote? In that case, your right to be heard as a private citizen voting is being taken away. So we need this transparency to preserve our trust in democratic processes. And if we don't get transparency in the software that prepares and processes these procedures in voting, then this can have negative social effects, and it can also reduce the trust that the public has in the democratic process. And if you think about something more broad and general, you know, your right to be free from discrimination. So imagine if you live in Germany, as I do, and you are applying for a job. So you start sending out your CV to lots and lots of companies. Some big companies, they receive hundreds of CVs a day for various job openings. So what they do is they use software to sort through their CVs. If they're using a proprietary software to do so, there's no way that you can be sure that they are discarding CVs that, for example, don't have a traditionally German-sounding name. Or, you know, this creates uncertainty in your mind about whether you are being rejected from the job because you are legitimately not qualified, or because, you know, there is some discrimination against you going on. So yeah, without free software, there's no way that you can know for sure. And there's no way that you can know if it's violating a fundamental right. With free software, if this is actually happening, you can hold them accountable for their actions and say, look, my rights are being violated, and I would like to have this violation be rectified. So I'm coming to the end of my talk now. I'm running out of time. Our goal with this session is basically for you to think about how software affects your fundamental rights and how control over technology can help you to enjoy your rights as a whole. I mean, we can go through every single human right that's provided for by the laws in the various treaties that's adopted in the European Union these days. And I'm sure for pretty much all of them, you can find a way in which software affects it in a real and practical manner. And if software is such a widespread and compulsory tool in how we live our lives, then openness and transparency really is essential to having positive outcomes to how it affects society and in how we enjoy our human rights. And yeah, so on this note, as we go through this legal education track, I would like to ask all of you after today to think about your use of software, think about free software, and yeah, basically how it supports your rights and maintain a democratic and open society. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel, for such interesting talk. I would say if there is maybe a small question by the audience, we could take maybe one before we start our next talk.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and very useful. And the fact that the software is free and open is, is a way to promote human rights, as you said, but this is not a guarantee, because the software can be open, can be free, but can in some way violate human rights. So are there any, certificate or any procedures in order to certificate that the free software is human rights compliant, let's say? And are you collaborating with some human rights association, for example, Amnesty International or others, in order to promote human rights and free software together? Thank you.
Well, I'll first address your first point, which is that, yes, I think free software is not a guarantee itself that the software would promote or help you access your human rights. I think it's a starting point. And I think that in order for it to be fully compliant, it has to be free software. And that's the point that we're trying to make. In terms of certification, not that I know of, I think that's an interesting idea, but I also see the difficulties with it, simply because there's so many rights, and many of them kind of are in conflict with each other as well. And a lot of human rights law is how you balance all these conflicts. And I think if you want to make a clear certification that this is absolutely human rights compliant, that gives rise to a lot of difficulties. But I think that's a very interesting idea, that we have a certificate that says that this is quite a good guarantee of human rights if you use a particular software for this particular purpose. I think it's something that needs to be worked on. We are not currently working with any organizations on this, but I think that's an interesting idea, and we might explore it in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Here, two related questions. The first one, is it right, or should it be right to not use software at all? Mm-hmm. And the second one, sometimes it is compulsory to use some kind of software, and it is not free software. Does it violate our rights? I mean, with public administration or something like that? I mean,
that's an interesting question. I think, like I said during my talk, a lot of these rights were conceived when no one had any idea of the impact that computers, internet, software would have on daily life. So I think you can make an argument, because that there is a right to freedom of religion, but freedom of religion also means freedom from religion, and you can transplant this idea to say that you have a right to not use software. Of course, like when you say that in situations where it's compulsory to use software that is not free, currently there is no legal precedent that I'm aware of that actually says that you have a right to sue someone for this. I mean, we have a campaign, Public Money, Public Code, which tries to make sure that public administrations at least try to provide free software alternatives. One idea that we've had in the past is Article 15 of the ICSER, which is the covenant, the international treaty that guarantees your economic, social, and cultural rights. It guarantees your rights to scientific improvement or access to scientific improvement. And part of that involves digital improvement and technology as well. I'm running out of time, but my idea behind this is that we could use the ideas in that article to kind of also put forth a principle that says that in the future maybe we could bring this to court and see if the law gets established that you can say that I want to refuse use of this particular proprietary software. But currently, yeah, there is no real legal recourse if you are put in that situation. Yeah. Running out of time.
Little bit of context. we at the Free Software Foundation Europe have put together this series of short talks to spread basic legal education around legal aspects of free software. So our next talk, it's what's copyright. Very important to also know this. And this talk will give us a basic breakdown of copyright law in the European Union and how it applies to software development. For this, Niharika Singhal is here. Niharika is an IT lawyer and a legal researcher who works as a project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. She handles various legal and European Commission funded projects. So thank you, Niharika. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you for the introduction. A very warm good afternoon to all of you. My name is Niharika Singhal, and today I'm going to be talking about the basics of copyright and what you should be knowing about it, especially if you're getting into the world of free software. So I'm going to first set the agenda for today. I'm going to be talking about basics of copyright first. Then I'll move on to what rights are protected by copyright. What is copyright infringement? And lastly, I'm going to discuss the terms copyright and copyleft. So, what is copyright? Copyright protects original works of authorship of literary and artistic works. So works covered by copyright range from books, magazines, films, choreographic notations, drawings, photographs, portraits, sculptures, computer programs, etc. And based on these examples, one can say that copyright basically covers works falling in the ambit of literary, dramatic, artistic, and musical works. Whoa, what just happened? Okay, so if you follow these examples, I think it would be a good time to test your knowledge. So let's get for another quiz time. The rules are simple. I'm going to show you some slides, some pictures, and you have to tell me whether these are copyrightable or not. And we could do this with a simple show of hands. Great. So my first question is, well, let's just discuss the slide first. So I'm sure most of you are aware of this show, The Office, personally one of my all-time favorite shows. And if you know about this show, this gentleman here is called Michael Scott. But the question is, do you think that the name Michael Scott is copyrightable? So show of hands for those who would say yes. And show of hands for those who would say no. Well, that's pretty impressive because actually the right answer is no. The name Michael Scott is not copyrightable because names are not protected by copyright protection. Simply because it requires some sort of originality. And well, this could in some cases be protected by a trademark, but under certain given circumstances. So the answer is no. Then, do you think architectural blueprints are covered by copyrightable? Do they have some sort of copyright protection? So raise your hands if you would say yes. Super. And for no? All right. Well, the right answer is yes, because architectural blueprints are actually artistic works, and hence they are copyrightable. Then the next question is, what do you think, a choreographed ballet performance, is this copyrightable or not? So show of hands for yes. Great. And for no? All right. So we see that most of the people voted for yes, and the right answer is also yes. A ballet performance is a choreographic work, and hence it is copyrightable. Okay, so who doesn't know Beethoven? And those are the notes from his Fifth Symphony. So my question is, do you think Beethoven still holds the copyright to the Fifth Symphony? Show of hands for those who would say yes. Okay, I just see half a hand raised, yeah. Okay, and those of you who would say no. All right, perfect. Actually, the right answer is no. The reason is that Beethoven is long dead, and the symphony itself is not protected as it's in the public domain. But if a performer records the symphony at their home, at a recording company, or even if it's recorded by a recording label, well, then in that case, it would be protected by copyright since it's subject to the performer's own creative work. It's basically the performer has displayed his own creativity and intellect to arrange those notes. So that would be covered by copyright, but not the Fifth Symphony itself. And then, lastly, my final question would be, do you think that the computer programs, software computer programs, are copyrightable? Show of hands for yes, please. Okay, and for no? Oh, nobody thinks so? All right, well, actually, the right answer is also this. Yes, computer programs come within the ambit of literary works and hence are copyrightable. So I'm very pleased to learn that most of you actually understand the basics of copyright and can fairly distinguish between what is copyrightable and what's not. So let's just discuss copyright in more detail. So the first aspect is that there is actually no need for any literary or artistic merit. What is important is actually just originality. Then coming on to the idea expression dichotomy. Basically, it's a legal doctrine that says that ideas are not protected, but the implementation of those ideas, that is the expression of those ideas, are protected. And something to know, something of immense importance is that how long does a copyright last? So basically, there's this international convention called the Berne Convention, and the Berne Convention stipulates the minimum term of copyright protection, which is the life of the author plus 50 years. But in the signatory countries, there are 179 signatory countries, including EU and a bunch of other countries, and they can offer this minimum copyright protection more than 50 years. So we see, for example, in EU, it's life of the author plus 70 years. In Mexico, for example, it's life of the author plus 100 years. And if the copyright is shared by several co-authors, then it will expire 70 years after the death of the longest surviving co-author. So now you put a lot of creative effort in creating a work. So it would also be important to know. It would also be important to know as to what you're deriving out of it and what are the rights of a copyright holder. So essentially, you have economic rights and moral rights. Economic rights are basically all the financial rewards that a copyright holder can claim, and moral rights are basically the non-financial rewards that a copyright holder can claim. Now, economic rights basically include right of reproduction. That is, for instance, cover printing of books, tape recording, digital recording, and even recording of those recordings. And it can cover storage of works in computer memory, on USB drives, and also on cloud storage. Then you have right of performance, broadcasting, and communication to the public and making it available. And then you have rights of translation and adaptation. And this covers on-demand and interactive communication over the internet as well. Then talking about moral rights, you have right of attribution and right of integrity. The right of attribution, in simple terms, is give credit where it's due. So if you're using someone's work, you need to acknowledge that. And right of integrity is basically like a right of respect. So the copyright holder can actually object if a user is basically using it in a decontextualized or in a way that is prejudicial to the honor, to the literary and artistic merit of the author. And once you know about your rights, it's also important to know as to how you can exercise them and what protection is available to you under the law. So anybody using or producing your copyright-protected material without the permission of the copyright holder is said to have committed the offense of copyright infringement, and the consequences can actually be grave. It can result into a lawsuit or even criminal charges. So in EU, as regards the infringement of copyright is concerned, a comprehensive level of harmonization is provided under the Information Society Directive, whereby EU member states provide for civil and criminal remedies under the national laws for copyright infringement. So let's see what these remedies are. First is the injunctive relief. So an injunction is basically a court order stating that a person should cease doing something or should do a particular act. Then you have recall or restitution of infringing goods. Then unjust enrichment, any benefit derived by an unauthorized user. Then the most important aspect is damages and how that has to be calculated. And this can be calculated on the basis of actual damages, loss of profits due to infringement, and reasonable royalties. So sometimes you also have, as a matter of rule, that the losing party has to reimburse the winning party's lawyer's fees and also the court fees. But the amount of this court fees or the lawyer's fees is determined by the national laws. And, well, copyright also, any infringement of copyright also can constitute criminal acts. And this could be subject to maximum imprisonment of 3 years with a fine. And if the infringement is on a large commercial scale, then it could extend up to 5 years with a fine. All right, so copyright basically means that the author has exclusive right to permit others to use his or her work. And coming to the last segment of my presentation, what is copyleft? It is actually based on a completely different premise. It is a general method for making a program or other work free and requiring that all modified and extended versions of the program to be free as well. So talking about software development, proprietary software developers actually use copyright to take away the freedom of the users, whereas copyleft actually provides the users those freedoms. So in a sense, copyleft licenses provide more transparency to the people. And, well, copyleft also provides an incentive to the programmers and software developers to add and develop free software by having only one condition in place, that any reproduction or redistribution of their work is subject to the same license as the original. So if you think about it, it actually reduces the copyright infringement cases, and as a result thereof, also burden on the courts. So in sum, I would also like to give you some examples of copyleft licenses. This would include GPL licenses or Creative Commons licenses, which are basically applied on literary and artistic works. Well, yeah, so in conclusion, the free software has actually challenged the traditional methods of copyright management by using copyright to build more openness and to allow the reuse of the existing works. So in a sense, the free software movement is a creative process. It's enabling a creative process of appropriation through the sharing of created content and giving the right to the licensees to use a work, often without any payment of any license fee. And well, on that note, thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, I would be glad to take them. Otherwise, I'm always open. I'm always free to answer your questions by email as well. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Niharika. So is there any question from the audience? Yes.
Could you go some slides back where you have the different things you can infringe about copyright? Yeah, this unjust enrichment. Mm-hmm. Is this just financial infringement, or can you enrich yourself also in other ways? Because mm-hmm. Enjoyment, it would enrich you in somehow, but you can't do anything against it.
Right. So if you create your work, that has some value, right? And if it has a value, it also has some financial, it has some sort of financial aspect to it. Every work has some sort of financial value to it, right? So if an unauthorized user is using your work, it's basically claiming the financial rewards which you are entitled to, right? So that is basically that unjust enrichment that you get out of the value of your work. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, okay, thank you. So I think time's up. So thank you very much, all of you.
Okay, thank you very much. We will start our next talk in 5 minutes before. So, yeah, thank you. So, hello everyone. Again, for those who just joined this track, we have put together this series of tour talks to spread some legal education around legal aspects of free software. So for our next session, I invite Lucas Lasota. Lucas is a senior legal project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. He's also a legal researcher and lecturer at the Humboldt University of Berlin. And today he will provide us an explanation of licenses, their legal obligations, and the consequences of not following these obligations. In addition to that, it will also simplify the understanding of copyleft and non-reciprocal licenses. So now I hand over the floor to you, Lucas.
Thanks a lot, Lina. Yes, thank you very much for being here today. It's a pleasure to meet you and for your attention. For those who are visually impaired, I will just do a quick bio description. I'm a man wearing a blazer, I'm bald with a beard, and we are in a seminar full of nice people. So yes, what is a license? Well, I think that the free software movement is very much concerned about licenses, and we talk about this a lot. But I would like today to introduce you of the license from the legal aspects, okay? And for that, I would like to explain first what we consider as software. So when we talk about license, we need to understand from the legal perspective what software is, okay, especially here in the European Union, and why we are so concerned about software licensing, why license is so important for us. And I will, in the end of my presentation, I will move a little bit just from the legal aspect and go also to the community aspect of license as an enabler of software communities. Okay, so please bear with me, and if you have some questions. Right, Niharika did a great presentation about copyright, and she explained to us that copyright here in the European Union, or at least in those countries that are signatories of the Berne Convention, it applies by default. It means that, well, when a software developer starts writing a software, she does not necessarily need to register this work in any kind of governmental agency, but copyright is starting to apply by default. And what does this lead, right? Well, basically, people say, oh, I'm not concerned about this. I think I just can go and use the work, copyrighted work, the software that has been developed by someone. But we also learned today in our legal track that no license does not mean public domain, right? So basically, when the set of copyrights is being enforced, is already being valid, you are not allowed to take copyrighted work, and in our case here is software, and just use it. You need a permission. You need an authorization of the copyright holder, okay? So in this sense, license is nothing more and nothing less than a permission, as an authorization. So who has the copyright? For example, a software developer has developed, or a company, whatever, and if you wanted to reuse this work, you needed to get a permission. So license are permissions, are authorizations, all right? So if there is no license, basically there is no authorization. So you are not allowed to do this. So we love free software, and the entire free software movement is license dependable. While we have this copyright system here, we need license in order to empower people to reuse software. Otherwise, reuse is not possible with authorization, okay? So, we understood that license is an authorization, but authorization for what? Okay, so we need to understand what is software. And for that, I would like to quote the software directive. So directive from originally from 2001, but there was some recap in 2009. In European legislation, there is no precise definition of software. But when usually we talk and we take the definitions from some technical boards, we can consider that software is a set of instructions that are executed by a machine, by more precisely a computer, right? And the software directive, this European legislation does not define this, but establish some principles for copyright protection over software, okay? And they use the term computer programs, right? And the first one I would like to highlight here is, that's it, member states, the European member states, shall protect computer programs by copyright, okay? So as literary work. So it's not choosing, like for an example, patent law, you know, it's not choosing any other area of the law, but is considering software as literary works, as today we learned also from Niharka's presentation. And this is very important because the copyright protection shall apply to expression, to any form of computer program. So we are not talking about ideas. For example, a software developer has an idea and wants to implement this, but the idea that she has in her head, it's not protected by copyright. But at the moment that these ideas are being implemented, are being put in some medium, then copyright protection starts to apply. And ideas and principles which underlie any element of a computer program are not protected. So these are very important principles. Right, so now we are understanding about this dichotomy about what is a software idea, or idea for a software, and what is the expression. But right, so when we're talking about this expression for the law, what is the expression? Well, today we learned, especially in Gabriel's presentation, that software, well, is everywhere and it concerns everything. So basically, when we are analyzing software from the legal perspective, we usually there is some classification, right? When we are talking about drivers, basically is this software used for device control, right? So that the first laid interaction with some kind of hardware. So we are talking about driver for mouse, for memory, or Wi-Fi, and etc. But also there's another classification, other type of software we call the kernel, and for an example, the GNU Linux, where this software executes the core functions of a system, right? And of course, we as users usually we have contact more with applications. So this type of software that are used for to perform specific tasks. So browser games, and any other type of apps. But there's, for software licenses, there's a very important definition and differentiation that we need to talk, and especially people that are talking about the free software, it's much concern about source code. So, source code is what is really important for the community and for software license, free software licensing in general. And I will just explain a little bit what is the difference between source code and executable code, right? So basically, let's take a look here. For example, we have here in our devices software that has been running here, but usually the software that has been running is is in a type of expression from the legislation point of view that should be understood by the machine that it's running. So basically, it is in executable form. So we also call that binaries or objectable code, because basically computers understand this binary code, okay? So this is not suitable for human reading or understanding. This is a bunch of, 0 and 1. In order for humans to start working with software, and of course, there's some exception when you're talking about reverse engineering, the compilation, of course, but the basic, the human readable form of software code is source code. And that's why this is extremely important for licensing. And the source code is not just the set of instructions for the machine, but is also the working environment for software development. There is comments there in source code. There's information about license. There is information about copyright holders. So source code is the working environment. So that's why this is really important for software licensing and precisely for free software. And when we are talking about proprietary and free software, usually we need to take in consideration this differentiation, okay? So when we talk about licensing, these permissions, because copyright law gives the copyright holders a full spectrum of rights management, and there is also this gradation, this spectrum. When we see all rights retained, perhaps we are talking about trade secret, but the public domain is all rights waived. But copyleft and permissive or non-reciprocal license are here. Sometimes more rights are granted, sometimes not so much. Right, when we are talking about software license models, basically we have two. We have proprietary, which the main purpose is to limit ways to access and control source code. We are talking about source code, so where, all the fun happens. And free and open source that we know that the main purpose is software freedom. And here we have differentiation between reciprocal and non-reciprocal license. And these types of software licensing directly impacts on software business model, and in software development. Right. But this is also an important element that I would like to point that we are talking about software license, but also when there are computer programs and, for example, video games that are software, but it implements other layers of information, for example, audio, video, and text, it's important to say that sometimes software license is not the best instrument to regulate this kind of permissions. That's why we are talking about license for content and data. And here I would like to point out for the Creative Commons licenses that are suitable for audio, videos, and image, documentation, data, and metadata. Okay, so in the last part of my presentation, when we are talking about the free and open source licensing, we are talking about the sets of permissions and authorizations, but this is also very important. The license itself is very important for software community when we are talking about it, and that's why we are so concerned about the type of license, because the license sometimes is considered as constitution, of the communities, because it sets the term of use and distribution of software. It constitutes the basis for working environment among developers and users, and establish the ground for software maintenance and further development. Okay? So with that, I hope that we made some progress in making license a little bit clear, and I thank you very much for your attention and hope to count with your questions. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Lucas.
Thank you.
And now, again, the time for questions. Is there any questions from our audience?
There.
Please.
You said that ideas are not copyrightable. What about, non-code the designs in a way, like let's say UML diagrams and stuff? Is this copyrightable or not?
Okay. Thank you for your question. Let's a little bit dive into it. Right. So ideas are abstract, right? It's pretty abstract. So it lives only on people's head, right? So while the ideas is until this format, it's not protected. But at the moment that someone puts this idea on a paper, on a diagram, or any type of medium, this is started to be copyright protected, okay? There is just one other thing I don't want to mention too much because it's out of the scope of my presentation, but there's a discussion about protecting ideas with patent law, but for that you need a whole structure, you need to register, and software per se, it's not protected. Okay, but we can talk that in a coffee if you want to learn more about this, okay?
Thank you
Any
very
other
much.
question? Okay, one, yeah.
Maybe a bit of a trivial or a very practical question. It's about the thing which when I'm browsing on GitHub, for instance, which I see that are a lot of repositories just containing a license file, but when I look in the files itself, they do not have a header. And the license file then maybe even has a license like the Apache 2.0 license. What do you say about that?
Okay. I would like to thank you for this very interesting question, and I would like, if it's possible, if you have time today, to stick until the end, because Lina and Linus, they will give exactly the precise answer to your question, and they represent the reuse initiative. So stick with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and we will come back in 5 minutes. So hello once again. And for those who just joined this track, we at the Free Software Foundation Europe have put together this series of short talks to spread some legal education around legal aspects of free software. So for the next talk, let me invite again my colleague Lucas Lasota. He will give us a breakdown of the most commonly used free software licenses and the obligations arising therein. Lucas is a senior legal project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. He's also a legal researcher and a lecturer at the Humboldt University of Berlin. So without any further ado, the floor is yours, Lucas.
Thank you, Lina. Hello, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be with you again. And for those who just joined or watching us, by the stream, I will just do a quick bio description for those who are visually impaired. I'm white man, bald with beard, wearing a blazer, and we are in a seminar room full of nice people. And today we'll talk about the commonly used free software licenses. If you had the opportunity to check my previous talk, I talked what is a license. And the takeaway from that presentation is that a license is an authorization. License is what grants other people rights to reuse or to interact with a copyrighted work. And with this presentation, I would like to introduce you to the commonly used free software licenses. I will name some license, and perhaps it's not the most loved one by you, and perhaps please don't be offended and say, oh, you didn't mention my license. There's a lot of free software licenses out there in the wild. That's why I just said the commonly used, okay? But if you wanted to introduce me to your very nice license full of free software features there, please, we can talk about that in a coffee. I'll be around until tomorrow. Right, so we'll talk and we do a quick recap about software license models, the type of free software licenses, and I will explain what are non-reciprocal licenses, also called permissive licenses, and reciprocal license that also very known as copyleft, okay? So basically, we went already today on this, but I would like to repeat myself because this is important for this talk. When we are talking about license models, we have basically two. We have the proprietary one, which the main purpose is limit ways to access and control source code, and we have the free and open source, which main purpose is free software freedom, and that we can have a classification on reciprocal license, also called copyleft, and non-reciprocal license called permissive. And please bear in mind that when you choose the term type of license, depending, for example, if it's a reciprocal or non-reciprocal, or if you decide to go full proprietary, which here we don't suggest, but anyway, it will affect directly how the development of your software will be impacted, and and also some software business models. Okay, so what is a free software license? Basically, from the legal perspective, we can understand that from policy perspective, from moral perspective, or even some philosophical perspective. But today, since we are in a legal track, I would like to point out some conceptions that are important for legal determination, for recognize when we say, okay, this is a free software license. And basically, there are two organizations that are curators of the term free software, what we can understand about free software, and another organization that is the curator of the term open source. The one is the Free Software Foundation. Not Europe, is based on US, and we are a sister organization. And the another one is the Open Source Initiative, okay? And basically, the definitions that each one of those organizations come up with, there is a very rich historical development. But when we talk about legal aspects, I would consider the definition, proposed by the Free Software Foundation and the definition proposed by the Open Source Initiative as synonyms, okay? And basically, I will stick with what the Free Software Foundation has come with. Basically, when we are talking about free software, and when we are talking about licenses that can be considered a free software license, are that license that, provides basically to downstream users 4 types of freedoms. All right, the freedom to run the software for any purpose, to study the source code, and for that, it's really important to have access to source code. We have the freedom of redistribution of copies, and the last freedom is improvement of the software and redistribution of derivative works, okay? The definition proposed by the OSI, although it's more verbose, basically it conveys the same idea, okay? And which kind of classifications can we talk about when now we are not talking more in the division about free software license and proprietary license. Now we are talking just about free software license. What kind of free software license can exist? And basically, we have 2 types. We have reciprocal and non-reciprocal. And what are the principles that guide this main differentiation? When we are talking about reciprocal licenses, the main principle is if you distribute the software that you received, so someone is the copyright holder, has published her software under a reciprocal license, a copyleft license, and now you are interacting with the software. You received the software, so yes, you can run the software for any purpose, you can use it, but now let's think that you wanted to redistribute the software, right? So if you distribute it, you must use the same license terms, right? And if you distribute the software, you must provide source code. So this is the principles of copyleft, is principle of reciprocal licenses. And when we are talking about non-reciprocal license, usually also people call it permissive license, but I like the term non-reciprocal. The main principle is if you distribute the software code, so basically you're receiving a software that is under a non-reciprocal license, if you redistribute it, you must provide license notice. And I will show you in a minute what a license notice is. Well, examples of reciprocal license, we have several of them. And the most loved one, the GPL, the GNU public license. And we also have, for an example, the Mozilla public license. And since we are here in Europe, we have a license for public sector called European Union Public License. But when we are talking about non-reciprocal licenses, we have, for an example, the MIT license, BSD, and the Apache 2 license. Okay. So let's start learning a little bit about the non-reciprocal license, because the type of obligations that they convey there is a little bit more simple. So, okay, so this is the MIT license. So nice to meet you. If you don't know MIT license, yeah, okay. So, yeah, and basically this is a very simple license. This is the entire text of license. So, and well, when we take the GNU public license, it's a little bit different, you know, and when we go to proprietary license, sometimes our contracts with, you know, full of paper there. But the MIT license is very simple, and basically here we have the copyright grants. So permission is hereby granted free of charge to any person, you know, and all these legalese. But what I would like to point out is the license notice. So the notice obligation. Remember when I was telling that if you distribute, you must provide a license notice. So here is the notice obligation. The above copyright notice and this permission notice shall be included in all copies of substantial portion of the software. Okay? So this is the type of obligation that you have under non-reciprocal license. But when we are talking about copyleft license, and that's this board is too small for me to put in the entire code, the entire text of the license there. I just wanted to point out to the rules and obligations of copyleft license. So, in here, what are the first rule? Remember, when I mean by distribution, redistribution, so imagine that you are a user of your company or you are another developer, and you are receiving, you are downloading copyleft code, you know? And then you start using just for your personal use. So you don't need to do anything. You can just use, all right? But the license obligations, the license terms will start to apply when you redistribute this code. So on commercial or non-commercial objectives, doesn't matter. So once you upload your work, part with this copyleft work, you need to abide the license obligations. And the obligation is, if you distribute your code only in binary form, you know, and we are not talking about source code. For example, you compile your code and now you are distributing it, you must make the corresponding source code available. So there is no way out, no pain, no gain. So if you wanted to convey that, you needed to provide access to source code, okay? But if you are distributing your code already in the source code form, well, congratulations, your job is done, okay? But there is another type of obligations when you consider about a copyleft license, and basically is the principle called inbound equals outbound. So when you receive a copyleft, a software that is protected by a copyleft license, you need to keep the same license terms. You must relicense the software you received on the same copyleft terms. So if GPL is entering, GPL is going out. If Mozilla public license is going, you need to keep the same license terms, okay? Right, and perhaps you want to say, okay, but this is a little bit complex. How I choose a license for my software project? Well, there are some, you know, ways in order for you to choose your license, and we have even a portal called Choose a License. We always recommend the GPL, the GNU Public License, because, well, it's a consolidated license. It's a license that has a story, has a reputation, and, you know, it's copyleft license. So the main objective of the license is to safeguard software freedom, right? But usually you need, there is some, you know, depending on objectives, there are other type of license that perhaps it's useful for you, okay? So I just wanted to show, again, don't be offended if your license is not there, but basically these are the most common, you know, free software license. So we have the GPL, that also is considered one license that are considered strong copyleft license. We have the AGPL for network copyleft. We have the LGPL, that's for libraries, called also weak copyleft and Mozilla public license. And also when we are talking about non-reciprocal, we have the MIT, the Apache, and other type of licenses. All information about the license is easily findable, you know, in the internet. You can read more about this type of license. And if you are searching for a license, you can certainly find information on how a license can suit for your project. In this note, I finished my presentation, and once again, I thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you once again, Lucas. And now I would like to know if there are any questions from our audience. No? So it seems like,
Here.
Yeah. One sec, I think we need the microphone for the...
Right.
What's your take on using permissive or reciprocal or non-reciprocal license for software developed out of taxpayer money?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, this is an excellent question, you know. And remember when, in my other presentation, and for you that are watching us in the stream, another presentation will be also available online, you can check that. We were talking about the relation between license and communities, you know. And I really believe, as an individual, that what we take the contribution from someone, we need to give it back. And when we are talking about reciprocal licenses, and when we have this rule here, inbound and outbound, I really think that the best license model for, you know, for software that has been developed by taxpayer monies, by public code, is the copyleft or the reciprocal license mode. Of course, it's you know, permissive and non-reciprocal is also considered free software, but the only way to safeguard that this piece of code will remain free is with copyleft license.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas. And once again, we'll start our next talk in 4 minutes. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
you. So hello everyone, and welcome to the Legal Education Day track. And for those who just joined, we at the Free Software Foundation Europe have put together this series of short talks to spread legal information around legal aspects of free software. So for today, for the next talk, we have Gabriel Kuwei-Bin. He is a senior legal project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. He is a former commercial and human rights lawyer, and he now manages the FSFE legal projects and activities. On his next talk, he will talk about license compatibility in a simple way by providing some examples, followed by discussions on some of the common incompatibility issues. So thank you, Gabriel, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Lina. So in the talk before this, we had Lucas, and he was talking, or he spent a bit of his time during his talk talking about reciprocal and non-reciprocal licenses. And one thing that you have to note when you have these differences in types of free software licenses is that these differences, they give rise to whether or not the licenses are compatible or incompatible with each other. So what exactly is license incompatibility? So it's basically a term that we use to refer to whether various pieces of software with different licensing terms can fit together within a single project and can be distributed together. So what we're going to look at in the next 15 minutes or so, we are going to first define license compatibility. We're then going to look at examples of licenses that are compatible with each other and that are not. And then we'll briefly talk about why license incompatibility is an issue and how you can sidestep that issue. Right. So before I explain what license incompatibility is, we're going to use an analogy. Full disclaimer, I take no credit for this analogy. This was developed by Heather Mika, who's a lawyer from the US working with software licensing and other legal issues related to software. So, yeah. Basically, developing software is kind of like organizing an extremely awkward dinner party for your family. So imagine you are put in charge of cooking a dinner party for your family. Your father tells you, yeah, I'm on an all-meat, no-carb diet. I will only eat steak, and I will only eat anything that has legs. Yeah, and then your sister calls you, and she says, I am a vegan now. I will only eat organic vegetables, nothing else. I feel very strongly about it. Meat is murder. And then you have your nephew, who, yeah, he is a very picky eater. He will only eat spaghetti. He will not eat anything else. Anything else is icky. If it's not carby, if it's not spaghetti, he won't eat it. He'll throw food at you. So yeah, cooking a dinner party for all these people is a nightmare already. It's an extremely annoying task. Yeah, but also imagine if your father, on his all-meat, no-carb diet, he tells you he refuses to join in the dinner if you also serve carbs to anybody else at the dinner table. Your sister says if there's any meat or animal products at the dinner table, she's not going to attend. And your nephew is like, yeah, I'm going to throw food if there's anything other than spaghetti on the table. So what do you do then? How are you going to resolve this situation if none of these people are willing to compromise with each other, if they all have their very strong principles about what they want to eat and what they don't want other people at the dinner table to eat? Then, yeah, it's a shame. Unfortunately, you have a situation where someone would have to be uninvited from the party. And yeah, as much as it pains you, it might be your family, but you know, if you remove one or more people from this dinner party, it will definitely make your ability to cook and to host the party for everybody much easier. So this situation kind of serves as an analogy for, excuse me, as an analogy for software licenses as well. So like people, software licenses, they each have their own set of rules, and when these rules conflict, then yeah, like peaceful coexistence at the dinner table, coexistence of these licenses within the same project will become impossible. And often, you know, license incompatibility often happens because software licenses not only will tell you what you can do with the software, in the case of reciprocal licenses, sometimes they also tell you what you cannot do with the software. They will explicitly state what you cannot do and will deny you the authority or the authorization to use the software or to use the code. So, in a situation where two licenses conflict with one another, and these conflicts are non-negotiable, we would say they are incompatible licenses. In other words, if it is impossible to combine the code between these two licenses together while still complying with all the obligations present in each of the code. It is therefore, when you are reusing code into your project, it's therefore important to keep in mind that you need to ensure that any third-party code that you incorporate into your license is compatible, into your project is compatible with the license that you've chosen for your project. So let's look at a few examples of compatible free software licenses, and I think a good starting point would be to look at two very popular licenses. We can look at the MIT and the GPL license. So as Lucas may have mentioned in his previous talk, the MIT license is one of the most permissive free software licenses out there. Basically, under its terms, you can pretty much do anything with the code. One problem when you say you can do anything is that you can turn derivative works of your code into proprietary software. So someone can use your software and turn the derivative work into proprietary software. When you say you can do anything with the software, you also have to be prepared to accept that any derivative work of your software, something bad, like being turned into proprietary software, can be done with it, right? That's an unfortunate side effect of non-reciprocal licenses. When you allow people the freedom to do anything, it means they have the freedom to do things that you might not approve of. So on the other flip side of the coin, we have our copyleft licenses, and the most well-known being the GPL. It requires that all derivative works be licensed under the same terms. In other words, like as Lucas said, GPL in, GPL out. So what you have now is a copyleft license and a reciprocal license. So if we take a look at the terms of the MIT license and the GPL license, we can see that there is a bit of a conflict. There is also a bit of a trend. There is a certain way that derivative works can and cannot flow between these two licenses. So because the MIT license is so permissive, we will have no problems taking something that was licensed under the MIT license, working with it, updating it, improving it, and then releasing it releasing the derivative work under the GPL license, because it's so permissive. You can do whatever you want. You can license it under the GPL. So what's happening here is that the MIT license allows derivatives to be licensed under the GPL. The GPL requires derivatives to be licensed under the GPL. There is no conflict. It's like if your brother has no dietary restrictions, he says, I'll eat whatever you put in front of me. And your vegan sister says, please, only vegetables, no animal products. So in this case, there's no conflict. You just cook vegetables, and everybody at the dinner table is happy. In a similar fashion, MIT license code can be reused or incorporated into a GPL project. Everybody's happy. It's very important to note, however, that the reverse movement is not true. You cannot move from GPL to the MIT license in the derivative work because the MIT license does not support the requirements of the GPL. So if we turn again to our trusty dinner analogy, your brother has no dietary restrictions. He says he'll eat anything, and he invites your vegan sister, who will only eat vegetables and non-animal products. So while your brother doesn't mind eating with your sister cannot attend the dinner because your brother says, oh, I also want to cook with meat, or I also want to cook with something. So she cannot be invited into the project without to the dinner party without there being some form of conflict. So while the MIT license doesn't technically mind the GPL work cannot move into an MIT license derivative work. Let's take a look at another example. You know, we have the original 4-clause BSD license, which is considered to be incompatible with the GPL license. So this is because the BSD license has an advertising clause requiring that all advertising materials mentioning features or use of the licensed software must display an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement basically reads, you know, something like, all advertising materials mentioning features or use of the software must display the following acknowledgement. This product includes software developed by the organization. So the GPL does not allow additional restrictions to be placed beyond those that the GPL already imposes. The original BSD license is considered to be incompatible with the GPL basically because this requirement to display the advertising clause is considered an additional restriction that's not included in the GPL and therefore not allowed under the GPL. So we can say that the BSD license, the original 4-clause BSD license is incompatible with the GPL. So why is license compatibility an issue? Yeah, the problem with having an incompatible license in your work is that you won't technically be allowed to distribute the software. I mean, it's fine if you combine all of this into your own personal work and you never upload it, you never do anything with it. Yeah, do what you want. But you will never be able to distribute the software, not legally at least, because you are not able to comply with all the obligations required of you under all these licenses to distribute the software. So what you have on your hands is a piece of software with conflicting license terms and terms that no user can technically, under the law, abide by in their entirety. So in this situation, you know, what you can do to resolve the situation, you might have to relicense your software, and if it's not an option, you might have to remove chunks of code that you reuse with the conflicting license terms and then work to patch things up from scratch. So, and yeah, this is something that you really want to avoid for several reasons. I mean, relicensing a project is a really tedious process for one. You know, you would have to contact all parties involved in who have contributed to the project, and they all have to unanimously agree on an alternative licensing approach. And this can be very difficult if you didn't have in place like a contribution agreement where contributing parties agree to, like, for example, hand over ownership of their contributions of the code, for example. And a more practical difficulty that you might face is that you just lose contact with someone. You can't find a contributor or you can't get in contact with them, and you can't get them just to consent to relicense the software. So one way that you can sidestep this issue is to ensure that you license your work in a way that's compatible with the GPL. This can help avoid a lot of potential incompatibility issues. The main reason for this is that, you know, a lot of free software developers these days prefer the GPL for, I think a lot of people think that, you know, the GPL provides a better quid pro quo for developers, establishes collaboration between people and companies, and there's a feeling that it protects your work better and that it encourages and overall increases the amount of free software that's out there. It safeguards the amount of software, free software that's out there. It's a very popular license. So if you license your free software project in a way that's not compatible with the GPL, there's a risk that you might fail to receive enough support from developers, from other developers to sustain your project. And even if you don't like the GPL yourself, many potential co-developers do. And in practical terms, this is something valuable to consider in terms of attracting contributions. And of course, another big advantage is that there is a lot of GPL license code out there for you yourself to take advantage of. Yeah, so that's the gist of license compatibility. As with all the other topics out there, it can get complicated very quickly. This is just a basic rundown. And yeah, but it's something that, you know, you really need to keep in mind when you start reusing third-party code into your project. So thank you. Maybe we can get some questions during the break. Thank you.
What about um, libraries when I add them, either as static or as dynamic libraries. Have I inserted the code to it? Haven't I? What are the legal things?
So libraries are a unique situation. There isn't any real case law or legal principle that establishes whether or not dynamic linking constitutes a derivative work. So I want to say I don't know. But it's a very gray area at the moment, and yeah, this is something that we can discuss later, and I do not have the proper tools to answer your question on this right now, because the law on this is very unsettled, and there are many different opinions on linking libraries and whether that constitutes derivative work. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Gabriel, again, and we will come back with our next talk in 3 minutes.
Woo!
So, welcome back. Again, for those who just joined the legal education track, we at the Free Software Foundation Europe have put together this series of short talks to spread legal education on legal aspects of free software. So our next talk will be about trademarks. So it will give us a basics of trademarks in the context of the European Union and the use of logos in your software project. For this, we have Gabriel Kuwebin. Gabriel is a senior legal project manager at the Free Software Foundation Europe. He is a former commercial and human rights lawyer, and he now manages the FSFE legal projects and activities. So welcome back, Gabriel. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Lina. So yeah, I think for this session right now, we're going to momentarily step away from the really nitty-gritty legal stuff for free software and talk about something that has more practical use on the commercial side of things if you're developing and looking to monetize or distribute your software project. So we're going to take a look at trademarks. Right. So to give you a quick breakdown of what we're going to talk about in this segment, I'll give some definitions of what a trademark is, why it's important to have a good name and logo for your software project. I'll go through some points to explain trademark infringement and its consequences, and finally we'll have some minor tips to how to check for and how to register your trademark. So what is a trademark? Yeah, basically it is a sign used by a person or an organization or a company, et cetera, to distinguish their product, a product or service from that of a competitor. So it can be a name, it can be a logo, a design, even a color used in a certain way. Yeah, but names and logos are usually the most common trademarks that are out there. So basically, by recognizing the trademark, users or customers can identify which product or which service originates from a particular source or a particular company. So yeah, up on the slides, you can see examples of the various trademarks that I'm sure you're familiar with. Yeah, the logo of a company can be a trademark. For example, the yellow M of McDonald's or the swoosh for Nike. But also the name itself. The name Nike is a trademark in itself. I'm sorry, as the name McDonald's for their respective industries. So why are we talking about trademarks now? Yeah, basically when a user is searching for a piece of software or an app to fix a problem that they're working with or to do something, the first thing that they will encounter when they come across your software project is, of course, its name or its logo. It's therefore important, that you come up with a good name, make a good impression. An unfortunately named project, can slow down its adoption. If people do not take the name seriously, for example, or if people have trouble remembering the name of your project. So some things to consider would be to give a name that gives users an idea of what the project is about or related to what the project is being used for. And yeah, as well as one that's easy to remember. I think that for plenty of developers, they have this idea that if the code and if the app is effective enough in doing what it does, that would just automatically means it gets adopted. I would agree that the efficacy of a particular piece of a particular software project does play a part in how it gets adopted and how effectively it gets adopted by its user base. But I think that there's something more as well if you're looking to commercialize your project. We have to be aware that there's so many different apps, programs, software out there in the ecosystem. So I think that there is some commercial value, at least, to make sure that your project stands out and capture the interest of the user. The important thing about trademarks is that trademarks are exclusive. You can't use a name or a logo that's already trademarked by another company or another organization. There's an asterisk to this, which I will get back to, but generally that is the underlying principle. Yeah, basically this means you're not allowed to use the name of or logo of a similar project. Yeah, and if the unauthorized use of the logo or a name of another company, another project, would result in trademark infringement, and that means getting sued. So I'm sure that's what everybody is trying to avoid. So yeah, avoid that. So it's important to note that, you know, trademark infringement is not just about using the same name or logo. It's also using something that is substantially similar. The main question to ask is, if I use this logo, will it cause confusion within the customer base or the user base about where the product or service that I'm using originates from? So what the law is concerned here is just basically to avoid this confusion. It also protects the trademark holder, or basically your company, from any damage to your reputation. That can arise to, you know, a difference in quality of the product or service provided by a copycat or an infringer. So as an example, you can take a look at what I have up on the slide here. You have on the left Starbucks coffee, and you have on the right Starbucks Cafe, which is a copycat. It's a copycat. So the logos look similar. They have the similar design, a similar layout, you know. Some things have changed, so they're not exactly the same, but they are similar. So I think a lot of people would argue that, you know, yeah, if you look at the copycat on the right, there's no way you're going to confuse that with Starbucks coffee. But this is an example that I've chosen that contains quite a substantial amount of difference. There are logos out there that, you know, actually actively try to confuse and try to take credit for what companies have done with their product in order to just like get quick and easy business. So if Starbucks right now sues the copycat for trademark infringement, the question for the courts would then be, you know, would someone who is going into a coffee shop to grab Starbucks coffee, would they be confused, or would they be confused that they're getting Starbucks coffee, or if when they're not? Yeah, and if they get food poisoning, if they go to Starbucks Cafe, would they think that they got that Starbucks is responsible for their food poisoning? So the court has then to make a judgment on this, and it takes into account numerous factors, you know, in order to decide whether there's confusion within the customer base. If they find that consumers are more likely to be confused, then they would say, okay, yes, the copycat is in fact infringing on the trademark of Starbucks. But, you know, as I said, there's an asterisk to everything. It really depends on the situation at hand. In some cases, the same name or sign can actually be used for two different companies if their user bases are different enough. For example, if they are in two completely different industries. So if we go back to this example again, let's say, I mean, Starbucks deals with F&B, food and beverage. And let's say Starbucks, instead of selling coffee, they sell vintage records, something completely disconnected from coffee. So if the courts look at this and say, okay, everybody who goes to buy Starbucks coffee, they know what they're getting. Everybody who goes to buy Starbucks coffee, they know it's not Starbucks. They know it's just, you know, vintage records. Then there is no confusion. Then it's very likely that, you know, the trademarks are both allowed to stand and there is no infringement in this situation. So yeah, this is all a very basic breakdown of the principles involved. The statement to keep in mind is always, it depends on the specific situation. So, do I need to register my trademark? There is a similarity in trademarks to copyright in that you do not need to do anything in order for you to have copyright. Similarly, you know, there's no real obligation to apply for a trademark or to register a trademark in order for a name or logo to be used for your project. In other words, yeah, you can have an unregistered trademark and you can use the letters like TM, trademark, to serve as a notice to the public that this particular name, this particular logo you are using it as a trademark and it is unregistered. However, if you don't register your trademark, you run several risks. You run the risk that someone down the line might actually register that specific name or that specific logo with the authorities, which would be troublesome for you. So if this happens, what happens is that if you want to dispute this a copycat trademark that has already registered their trademark while you haven't, then you have to come up, you have to produce evidence that you came up with the name or the logo first. You started using it first to sell your products or to distribute your app. You have to show that it's widely recognized by the public and your user base, and that it's specifically that your user base specifically associates this mark with your app. Or to your software or to your goods and services, and not to the copycat or the competitor, et cetera, et cetera. So whenever you try to dispute something like this, it takes time, money, and effort, and that's something that I think we all want to avoid. If you do register your trademark, however, you gain a certain number of advantages and additional protections. These vary in details depending on which country or jurisdiction you register your trademark in. But the basic protection is that, the authorities, the state, formally recognizes that you are the person using this trademark. So anybody who comes along who wants to dispute this, they have to go through what I just mentioned, all the time, effort, and money to dispute your use of the trademark, which places them in a more difficult situation because the burden of proof is now on them. And registered trademarks, you can append this R to indicate that, this logo or this name is being used as a registered trademark. So what are the consequences of trademark infringement? Facing a lawsuit would be costly, payment of monetary damages to the original trademark owner, legal fees, court fees, attorney fees, blah, blah, blah. Additionally, at the end of the day, if you lose, you still need to come up with a new name anyway at the end of the process. And by doing so, you can potentially, or it's most likely that you will alienate your user base or confuse them because you have to explain why you're changing your trademark. You have to explain to them why something that they're familiar with is now being replaced with something else. It's therefore vital that you check that the name that you intend to use for your project is not already taken or substantially similar to an already existing trademark. So, how do you check if your potential name or logo for your software project is already trademarked? You can run a search for trademarks that would conflict with the name you've chosen with the EU IPO, the EU Intellectual Property Office, or at the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Office, global brand database at the following links that are up on the slide. So photos, if you're interested. And it doesn't cost you anything to do a search on these websites. I mean, additionally, it's also good to do a search for unregistered trademarks as well to see if there's any potential conflict with existing marks that are already out there in the wild. You just do this with simple online searches. Look in public source code repositories and check domain names. Just see if there's anyone out there who's already using your mark and the same name as your project. Right. What do you get out of registering your project name as a trademark? So it grants you exclusive rights in all current and future member states of the European Union. You can obtain these rights through a single registration. And there's a guide for how to do so at this website. And unfortunately, it can be pricey. I mean, it costs 850 euros to do this. But at the end of the day, it's important that you make the decision as to whether there's a potential confusion with the name that you're using and the mark that you're using, and whether this is a worthwhile investment for you and your project, because especially if your goal is to eventually commercialize and monetize and distribute your software. So I hope this was practical and useful for you, gives you some food for thought about trademarks and free software projects. So thank you.
So Thank you very much. I would say that since we're running out of time, if there are any questions from the audience, we can take it in the break. Okay, yeah, let's take one question.
Yeah, what about trademarks and free software licenses? If I, say I name my project somehow, put the GPL on it, put it on GitHub, Codeberg, whatever, and someone makes a derivative work of it. Can they still name it the same thing? Would that be a copyright? Would that be a trademark infringement? What about that?
I cannot answer this for sure because I have not encountered this problem so far. But I would say that the minute you fork it and when it's a derivative work, there's a substantial difference so that you can say that my work within this fork is covered by this trademark, this particular mark. And then when they have moved it and improved on it and made their changes to it, then this is a separate work that's covered under another mark or another name. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I would say let's stop here. We'll have a short break of 3 minutes and then we will come back with our next talk. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our legal education track. So, for those of you who've just joined us on this track, our goal with this series of short talks in this track is to spread basic legal information and education on the legal aspects of free software. So, for our next speaker, we have with us Stefano Menegazzi, who will speak to us about the Zoom project, which aims to raise awareness on the importance of knowledge generation and management in collaborative innovation ecosystems which rely on free software. Stefano is an innovation project manager at the Hub Innovazione Trentino and coordinator of the Zoom project. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Stefano.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. So hello everybody from here and from the online. Today I would like to talk about the Zoom project. This project and my speech in particular will not tell you much in terms of results, but it's more, the presentation is more relative to the possible evolution and the possible outcomes from this European project. So, what is the project about? The project in general is about knowledge. So the knowledge is an asset that is constituted of three main aspects. On one side you have education, innovation, and research. The knowledge, I think we all agree on that, creates positive influences in terms of quality of life and also in terms of industrial competitiveness. Zooming in to a second stage of detail, the project is about knowledge valorization. So how the results of research could be exploited to create new products, new services, processes, to create social innovation, to create new companies, so spin-out, spin-offs, startups, could contribute to evidence-based policies and in general to the creation of IP-related rights. This will have a positive impact in terms of possible, for example, job, sustainability, social fairness, health, skills, well-being. All these aspects are enabled by this process of knowledge valorization. In particular, zooming in a little bit more, the Zoom project has the objective to raise awareness on the topic of IP management with the open licenses. The project is related to three kinds of aspects of open licenses. So the first one is the software. You surely all well know about open source licensing strategies and so on. The second is hardware, so having the possibility to deliver the design of a component, of a part, openly and guaranteeing it to be reproducible in many different places and by many different people. And finally, open data. Open data in particular is a kind of open that is really relevant in particular for aspects such as Industry 4.0, where companies right now all have had investments and created a lot of data, are generating a lot of data that are sometimes unused. All these three aspects generate the three O's. So the topic of our project, and the reason why in the name of the project we have three O's, is this one. The questions we want to address is, for example, how value is created with an open approach to IP licensing. So if I choose to use an open license to my hardware, software, or data, how can I guarantee or take value from that? The second one is related to the business model. So which business model can be enabled or disabled by choosing an open license? So how a company or my company, for example, can access the market and how can create employment, for example, and other positive effects on the community. how new research results could reach the market with open licenses. So which strategies could be adopted by researchers, for example, or developers that want to see their IP created, their product reaching the market. And also how open license IP management strategy could enhance the collaborative innovation ecosystem. So in this point, we have a really interesting topic that is extremely relevant to the European Commission, and that is maybe the most difficult question of all them. How does open licensing approach for open software, hardware, and data, how can it enhance the possibility to have more than one company accessing the IP, for example, more diffusion, more knowledge, more awareness on the new technologies in particular. The project is really oriented to new technologies coming from research. How can this contribute to having a better and a more fast access for all the people to the new technologies? In the project, we identified a number of possible stakeholders for our project. This is more or less our set of entities or persons that could be reached by our activity. In particular, among them, just this one, no? Okay. The researchers in particular, we have a lot of IP is generated by research. Okay. The important part is that this kind of IP could get out of the drawer of the university, of the research center, and that this could effectively then have a positive impact on the overall society. We have, for example, startups, small, medium enterprises, companies that could benefit, that could develop and deliver with open licensing approach their IP. This obviously is then facilitated, they should be facilitated, and for that we need to have probably an improvement in the level of knowledge on the open licensing and on the 3Os, basically exploitation to in particular, we are talking to innovation agencies, for example, also the company where I work, Abinnovazione Trentino, that is an innovation agency itself. We have the technology transfer offices, that are offices dedicated to tech transfer in the university. We have the PathLibs, that is an European institute, okay, that is distributed around Europe, that works to support companies and to correctly manage their IP. Digital Innovation Hub and also European Digital Innovation Hub also are stakeholders of our project. So what we want to create in terms of these two macro containers of stakeholders is to have the possibility to empower them with our awareness raising campaign on the role of these 3Os for their work, in order to have a distribution of knowledge, and they could enabling them to expand their services in order to reach and to diffuse all the knowledge we will create in the project. Other stakeholders are EU Commission, for example. In this case, the project will have an output, as an output, some policy suggestion and some literature-based outcomes that will be presented to the Commission. We have another stakeholder that is maybe sometimes not so clearly identified, are venture capitalists. So companies willing to invest in projects, in research outputs, for example, in new companies, in startups and so on, that often we can see from common practices are not considering probably the open approach the most exploitable from their point of view, obviously, and so they tend to not finance, not support projects that could be relevant, but based on open licensing, obviously. Then, obviously, the relevance to society. We all know the positive impact of open licensing and the open approach, in particular copyleft, to the community. Okay, so on one side, talking about knowledge, I like to stress the possibility to disseminate knowledge through open licensing, through granting access to source code in case of software, designs in case of hardware, and data sets in case of data to all the people in order to empower them and to get to know better the topic, in particular when we are talking of new technologies or innovative aspect. The project objectives, basically we will reach 500 researchers, we will reach 200 employees from companies, 30 TTOs, 30 Patrib, and 15 ADH. The largest number here obviously is researcher, but we want also to involve companies because as we all know, probably companies also are large contributors of open software. In particular, we had as an input a report from the Commission that small medium enterprises in particular are great contributors for a large quantity to the developments of open software in this case. So, what will be the output of the project? This is probably the part you will be most interested in. The project will disseminate, will create and disseminate 4 kinds of outputs for there will be digital material in terms of training materials for researchers, for all the stakeholders we identified that will be thought and designed accordingly to the specific needs of them. We will have interactive tools, so the idea is to have online tools to able to support the licensing and business aspects in order to have an adequate support for deciding which kind of open licensing strategy could be exploited for the IP that was created. We will have specialistic material, so in particular thought for lawyers, for pathlibs, and for all the specialists on legal and business, obviously, aspect. We will have open access publications, so articles and all the material that will be generated will be published in open access. We will have 1 or 2 policy outlooks on the 3 O's. It's interesting because the Zoom project is the only project that was financed in the only call related to IP management in the 2 years, 2021, 2022. So it's extremely interesting that the only project financed was related to the topic of openness and open approach. And finally, we will have also software. So we will produce software, obviously not from scratch. We will try to exploit and to use already available open source software as a basis for our tools. And in terms of the idea is to have to produce a license manager. So software that could exploit researcher companies and single developers and so on to understand the inbound licenses, to support the choice of the outbound license, to have also ideas on which kind of business model could be implemented considering the choices that are taken during development. Obviously, this part will be supported by already available project. Among them, there is the Free Software Foundation that is also partner of the project, Reuse, okay, obviously. And in the project, during the activity project, we will work on that. Then I just keep the few slides that will be uploaded by Noi Tech Park and about the partnership, about more or less the general steps to the end of the project, the milestones. This project information instead, I think, should be more or less explained. The project just started, so we are at month 2 of the project. We will have 2 years to conclude all the activities. Soon we will have the idea platform online at this email address, and you have an email address. So we will be really happy to have you connected and participating to our activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Are there any questions for Stefano? Maybe we take one and then we go for the break.
Yet one again from me. Yeah, why did you choose GitHub for your orientation thing? Why don't you choose, like, let's say, Codeberg or any other instance?
Yeah, it's the idea of just a second. The reason for having GitHub basically is because we have a connection with them. Okay, so we have the contacts. Obviously, all the orientation for the GitHub platform will be also extended to other platforms. GitHub is just the reason why we have GitHub in here is for previous activities, also related to reuse project. But obviously, this kind of orientation for on the management will be extended to all the platforms we can reach. Obviously, it's the material. All the material will be openly accessible, and the software obviously will have coherent licensing in order to guarantee also a long-term sustainability of the project, because it's one point we really want to address is to deliver this material in an open form in order that every expert, every contributor, every developer, for example, for the software part also, could implement the possible improvements and updates, because also we will need updates on that.
Okay, I think we'll go for a break now. We'll start in 3 minutes with the next talk, which will be an introduction to the reuse specifications. Thank you. everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this legal education track. For those who just joined us on this track, the FSFE's goal here today is to provide a series of short talks for everybody to spread basic legal information on the legal aspects of free software. So our next talk will explore some of the most common issues with licensing projects and provide recommendations on licensing free software projects easily, efficiently, and effectively by way of using the reuse specification. And to speak with us about reuse is Lina Ceballos, who is a lawyer with a background in political science. Lina is a policy project manager with the FSFE, and she also coordinates our involvement with reuse. So without further ado, I hand over to Lina.
Thank you, Gabriel. And hello, everybody. So as already Gabriel mentioned, today I want to give a very brief introduction of what the reuse initiative is, because now, if you have been here during the whole track, we have learned the importance of licenses and copyright, and therefore it is also important to declare this information on your project. So the FSFE created the reuse initiative 5 years ago, and it basically aims to make declaring this legal information in your project easy, but also fun. It seeks to be readable for humans and machines alike, as well as it sticks to already existing best practices. So to start with, I would like to talk a little bit about the common mistakes that we have seen so far, kind of like the state of play of how projects actually declare licensing and copyright information at the moment. So we have noticed that there is definitely missing information about license or copyright of own or third-party code. And this is connected with the second issue, which is that reusers may overlook this legal information. And we have already seen that licenses and copyright, it's important, and then actually if you overlook this information, you might incur into some legal issues as well. There is also a little bit of a problem about how to deal with multiple licenses, because if you are a developer, you know that your project might be under more than one license, and therefore it is a little bit tricky to know how you display this information when we're talking about more than one license. There is also a little bit of license ambiguity, because so far we have seen that some projects have an annotation of the license, let's say in this case the GPL, and then it says version 3. But we know that there is a GPL version 3 only, or version 3 or later, and then this is not clarified on the way it is displayed, and therefore it's a little bit ambiguous to know exactly where the license that the project is using. And there are also already some conflicting best practices. So for instance, some people store the text of the license in a file called copying. Some others store it in a file called license, or in the README file, so it is a little bit unclear where to find this information so far. So that is the reason why the FSFE decided to create the reuse initiative. The reuse initiative is based in some principles. So as I already mentioned, we're trying to make easy, but also fun to find the copyright and license information, because we're going to store this information in every single file of our repository. We are going to avoid silos, because, again, we're going to store the info of the repository as close as possible to the code, so everything is going to be inside our project, and every information that you need to know about the project is going to be within the project. I already mentioned this information is readable by humans and also by machines, so later in the workshop you will see that with the help of our reuse tool, the reuse tool is able to identify this information, and you as well, you are able to go through every file and then read this information. And again, we're making licensing easy. As we have seen, there is a lot of things to take into account, but we're trying to make it easy for developers to actually comply with these legal obligations. And how are we going to do this? So we're going to make our project reuse compliant with very simple steps, which are 3 steps. We're going to choose and provide a license. Again, we already learned a little bit about licenses, the importance of them. We're going to add the copyright and licensing information to each file of our repository. And then finally, we're just going to confirm that our project is reuse compliant. So let me go one by one. So the first one, we're going to choose and provide the licenses. So once you have made the decision of like which license you're going to use for your project, you're going to store the text of this file in a text file that you're going to save under a directory that we're going to call licenses. So this is actually one of the first features of reuse. We are going to have a dedicated directory where you're going to find all the licenses used in the project. And we're going to name this text file after the SPDX license identifier tag. Again, we're trying to already stick to existing best practices. And for those that don't know, SPDX is already a project that is trying to make standard the way this legal information is displayed. So in this example, we see the root of a project. And then we see that there is a directory called licenses. And within this directory, we have the GPL3 or later. And then the tag is used there as well. So it's very clear to know what license the project is using. Then we're going to add the copyright and license information for every single file of our repository. And we're going to do it through a header. And the header is going to look like here in the example. Again, we're going to make use of the SPDX license identifier tags as well as the SPDX file copyright text. So in this case, we see that this specific piece of code is under the GPL3 or later, and that the INDO is the copyright holder. So it's very straightforward. I know that in this moment, you might be wondering, okay, but there are some files that I cannot edit, such as binary files, image files, JSON files. But for this, we have 2 alternatives. We recommend one more than the other. However, we have 2 options. We have first a separate .license file in which we're going to store this information. So in this case, we have the picture of a cat. And then we're going to create a .license file in which we're going to include the license identifier as well as the copyright text. So whenever we go to the image directory and we see the picture of the image, we can go to the text file and find this legal information. But we also know that if your project is pretty big, and let's say you have 2,000 pictures, and creating 2,000 individual files for every image is not ideal, and actually will double the size of your project. So for these cases, we have the deb file, which is a project by Debian. And we're going to store this deb file in a dedicated directory called .reuse. And here we're also going to specify what directory and what the copyright and license information is. So again, in the example, we see that all the pictures in the image directory are under the CC BY 4, and Great Artist is the copyright holder. However, in this case, we advise to really make sure that you know that the legal information is correct, because you might be including some files that might not be under this legal information. So if you're going to make use of this option, please be really careful about this. And third, we're just going to confirm that our project is reuse compliant. So with our helper tool, it's going to scan our project, and it's going to tell us how many files have this information. Can also show us what licenses have been used in a project. And then in this case, we can see that our project is reuse compliant because 6 out of the 6 files contain this information. Again, we're going to learn a little bit more about this in the workshop that we're going to have after this talk. So if you are interested to see how this actually works, then stick around. So here we have, I would like to talk a little bit about the components of reuse. So we have first a set of best practices that I went very briefly today, such as the licenses directory. We're going to add this information in individual files. We also have options for files that you cannot edit. And we're trying to do this to make standard the way this legal information is displayed. We have a helper tool that we're going to learn more about this in a workshop, which actually supports developers in the process of making projects reuse compliant. We have very nice things that the tool does, such as adding the header or scanning, linting, linting the project to see what you're missing. We also have a tutorial and an FAQ. This tutorial shows you how to make your project reuse compliant. And the FAQ also gives answers to some questions, basic, but also advanced questions. And also not only about reuse, about the tool, but also some legal questions. So we highly recommend that you take a look at the FAQ because it's pretty good. And we have an API in which you can register your project whenever it becomes reuse compliant. And then you're going to get a very nice dynamic badge that you can put on your repository, and then everybody that goes to your repo can see that your project is reuse compliant. And to very briefly talk about who has adopted reuse. So in our API, we have more than 1,200 projects registered. The majority of projects from our Next Generation Internet initiative have implemented reuse recommendations. The Next Generation Internet is a European Commission funded project. In the area of more like community, so KDE, for instance, and all its frameworks have also implemented reuse, and they actually have also included in their policy directive or guidelines. Projects such as CUR or GNU Health, and also Cosmos Scout, which is a project by the German Aerospace Center, have also become reuse compliant. From the corporate side, we also have Siemens, Huawei, SAP, Lafray, LF Energy, and partially the kernel of Linux have also implemented reuse, because it's pretty big. And the question is if you and your project or the project or friends are gonna become reuse compliant. For this, I would like to finish my presentation for today saying that we welcome any contribution, either from you joining the mailing list to join the discussion, or also contributing with code. Reuse is a free software, and people that maintain this software wouldn't mind any extra help there. And again, we also have the Reuse Booster, which is trying to make a little bit closer experience with projects in which we support them in the process of making reuse compliant, because in the end, we want reuse to become the standard way to declare this legal information. And with this, I would like to thank you all, and I think I have some minutes to take some questions, so thank you very much.
Yeah, do we have any questions for Lina?
Yeah, hi, me again. I already asked the question, and in my mind, I already answered it to some extent, but I just wanted to get this I think it's a gray area with the fact of the license file on the root level, with having maybe an Apache 2.0 license, and then the missing copyright headers in the file itself. If I encounter so many repos on GitHub which actually do have that situation, I'm just asking myself, if they are not compliant for reuse, how can this be then it really is a big issue, isn't it?
How can we, sorry, what?
Isn't that a big issue if so many repositories on GitHub are not compliant for reuse?
Yeah, that's actually a big issue. I mean, it is a big issue that projects don't have such information like copyright, because we know that we learned today that that's such an important information to have in your repository. And actually, reuse is trying to avoid these situations, right? Because your project will become reuse compliant only if you include already the copyright and the license tags. So it makes mandatory for you to include such information. And I agree, I find that super problematic. And I don't know the way I move forward if you maybe want to make use of such code to contact the project and ask who the copyright holder is before moving on.
Okay.
Because, and then maybe send a link to reuse and ask them to declare this information in a better way.
Yeah, I just had a hard time to wrap my head around the fact that it is really so widespread.
It is very problematic, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks. You. Is there any other questions? All right. Then stick around for the workshop because it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and the workshop will take place here in 4 minutes. So see you soon.
Thanks.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to this legal education track that we have for you today. For those who've just joined us, our goal with this track is to provide basic legal education on the aspects of free software. So we've come to the last session that we've planned for today, which is an interactive workshop on how to make a repository reuse compliant. And to guide us through this workshop, we have with us Linus Zehn, who is a system administrator and an aspiring programmer. Linus has a background in political science, philosophy, and economics, and he currently works as a system administrator for FSFE, and as well as a coordinator for the Reuse Initiative. So I hand things over now to Linus. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Linus. We have a lot of time, actually. We have 45 minutes. I see the clock running down there at 14, but it doesn't matter. I think we have quite some time, and depending on what your interests are as an audience, I thought of how to structure this. So I will show you briefly how to make one example repository reuse compliant, and then maybe can I get a quick show of hands from you? Who has a laptop with? Nice. And would they be willing to get it out later and actually try something themselves? Show of hands again? Okay, that's pretty cool. So then I think I will try to keep things short with the stuff that I'm showing. And then we can make sure that you install Reuse on your machine and that you can actually start using it on one of your projects. And then if you have any queries or any issues come up during that process, we can troubleshoot them together. So Reuse is a Reuse compliant free software project. It's a recursive, like the GNU thing. GNU is not Unix, GNU is not Unix. And you can contribute to it. I'm one of the maintainers. We're always looking for help. And it's on GitHub. Currently, once Gitty adds federation features, we will move it to a free instance, to a free forge. So let's start. So one thing, a very nice way to get started with this is to actually, let's start with the very basics. Let's install it. Reuse is in so many package repos, so it should be super simple for you to install it. I think we're in more than 13 package repos. I just checked today, so we're in Arch, Debian, Fedora, Nix packages, of course, OpenSUSE, Ubuntu. Unfortunately, 2204, the current LTS, is a bit older version, but you can still use it for the purposes of this workshop. But I actually prefer to install Reuse with a tool called pipax. So that kind of creates a virtual environment for every command line tool, and I'm gonna just install it right here. Can everybody in the back see the text? Is that large enough? Yeah? Cool. So now we have installed Reuse. The next thing, just for the purposes of this presentation, you could, if you can't think of a project that you would like to make Reuse compliant, you can take the example repository that we provide and clone that. I've already cloned it, so let's just move in there. And Lina has already told you how you make a repo Reuse compliant. You first choose your licenses, and that's what we're going to do first. So there's a command with the Reuse tool. It's called Reuse init, and it will ask us, hey, what license is your project under? Please provide the SPDX license identifier. If that sounds like, I don't know what the SPDX license identifier is, we can interrupt this here at this point, and we can type in Reuse supported licenses, and we get a big list of all the licenses that are out there. This is like because my terminal is really big here. But here you have all the licenses that you know, and then you have the SPDX license identifier next to it. This looks much nicer if you're actually a little bit smaller like this, but I'm gonna leave it zoomed here. So let's, for the purposes of this project, let's choose GPL3. I need to learn to type, or later. Let's also use CCO 1.0, which is a license I like to use for kind of insignificant files, like git ignore files, or maybe if nothing special happens in your Docker Compose files, you can also, I often license my Docker Compose files like that. So let's also add CC0. Maybe if you have pictures, but you can always come back and add more licenses later. I show you how to do that. And please, if at any point something is unclear, I want this to be interactive as much as possible, it being a stream and in this room. So,
what is the CC0 license?
I think the CC0 license is a very short license that basically just puts it in the public domain. Yeah, it's a very simple terse license that just puts it in the public domain. So what's the name of the project? Let's call this reuse example here. The internet address, I'll plug our website here, which is reuse.software. What's the name of the maintainer? Well, let's just say it's the FSFE. And contact@fsfe.org. Now it's downloading those licenses, and as Lina has shown, it's put them in the licenses folder. So now if we move over here, and then we see we actually have the license text over here already. Mm-hmm.
So where do you download licenses from? Because I mean, there's over the years there have been like very different licenses, like with different addresses from the FSFE, for example, and like different like small changes in the formats and so on. So there's like one specific place where you're like creating all the licenses. Or?
Yes, this is where SPDX comes in, because they kind of keep a ledger of the licenses and the license text. So if you go reuse supported licenses again, you have this link here for every license. I'm just going to choose anyone here. And it opens a browser where you have the text of the license and also the link, in this case here, an archive link of where this comes from. So this is the work that SPDX does, which is really cool and kind of like a foundation of reuse. So where were we? So now if we can always run, I mean, when I'm making a repo reuse compliant, I kind of find myself repeatedly running reuse lint. It's kind of the core of the thing. That's also the command that you will use in your CI if you want to make sure that a repository remains reuse compliant, or that stuff is rejected if it isn't. And so let's just run this here and see what it says. So here we see, okay, we have unused licenses. Okay, this is already, so this already tells me, because the kind of the status quo for many projects, which is very, not ideal, is that they just dump the licenses file, the licenses in the licenses file, and then be done with it. But that's actually, they're just reuse things, they're unused at this point, and I think this is correct. The reuse spec tells us we have to, like every file, there needs to be some kind of information of what copyright, who's the copyright holder, and what license it's licensed under. So, and here the linter tells us the following files have no copyright and licensing information, and then it lists all the files. If you have a very large repo, this will be a very large output. One of the upcoming features will be to have the output of this lint command also machine readable. If you pass a --JSON flag. Yes?
What about libraries you are just including? Like, let's say you're making a Java thing and you're just... What shall I do if I just have a Java project and I'm importing some random Java libraries? How can I make this thing reuse compliant?
Well, I think then you would have to see, I mean, reuse is primarily geared towards making your code reuse compliant. And if you're having external dependencies which have licensing issues, then it's kind of their thing. if you're actually reusing source code from these projects, then obviously you need to you need to make sure that the licensing information that they want you to provide, depending on what license they have, is actually also in your code. It's maybe.
We have faced the same situation when and we only apply a reuse to first party, and everything which is third party separated. And if at all possible, and if there is no reuse information, we can upstream a pull request or a merge request for making them compliant, because you cannot add copyright information to software which is not yours.
Exactly. That's the
never.
Kind of
This is do not add copyright information if it's not already there by the author or by the copyright holder.
Yeah. Does that answer your question somewhat? I mean, so also like don't use random Java libraries.
Yeah, let's say they are reuse compliant, but I want my people to know, well, we are using the MIT license. So part of this project is licensed under MIT, Apache, whatever. But you don't find the source code here in this project, but if you run it, you will run this thing.
Yeah.
What should I do now? Because everyone uses these libraries in some way.
Yeah.
Even if it's only NumPy.
But then the licensing is their issue. You know, then they would have to become reuse compliant, and then you wouldn't have an issue anymore. Because running is different than distributing. I guess that's the core here. I mean, to be discussed, you know. I mean, please feel free to create an issue and in the reuse helper tool, and you will get very thoughtful replies there by people who have thought a lot about this. But that's what I can tell you now, I think.
Okay, let's get it done.
Yeah.
To chime in again, reuse is for announcing your own copyright information. Others would announce their own, and of course, it's good to know what license is under the libraries you're using, but it's the only thing you can do is to push the matter upstream into open issue and say, why are not you reuse compliant? Well, it's their decision. You can present this possibility for having a machine-readable licensing information readily available to others directly into your own repository, not third-party repository. That's not your business. It's you can only suggest.
Exactly, yeah. And I can put you in contact with the person who wants to make Rust reuse compliant. He faces a lot of those issues, you know. So if you're very interested. But let's continue here along this path. So now we have reuse lint. We ran it and we see, okay, like I'm not reuse compliant. That's very sad. Let's start becoming reuse compliant. So for this, we've built the add header command, and this allows you to specify on the command line what copyright holder and what license a particular file should be licensed under. And let's just look at a file, how it looks now. Let's take this very complicated C file here, and now let's run reuse add header. Let's say we are John Doe, and we also pass a flag, the license flag, and then we can just give it, so let's say the README is under GPL, the source file that I was referencing, main C, and then what else? And our make file is also GPL. So if we run that, it tells us successfully change header file of makefile, source main C, and of readme. So let's see what that actually did to our C file. It figured out the correct syntax, the correct common syntax for C, and it added this correct file header. Let me maybe briefly say one word about why it's so important to have this in the header of the file rather than, I mean, I can understand it's much easier to just put a dep5 file and just glob your entire project and say, this is on this license. It's much easier. But there's a couple of big downsides with that approach. And the main downside, I think, is when you move files around in your directory, they don't carry the license with them. If you have different paths, then you need to remember, I need to change this dep5, and reuse will not be able to tell you about it because it's just taking the information from the globbing in your dep5. And so that's why I think we are heavily pushing in the spec for file headers. And also, I think with the advent of tools like GitHub Copilot, I mean, this need for licensing information to be present in the source file itself, where the code is, it becomes even more apparent. And okay, so now let's run reuse.
In your add header command, you specify the files. It would be okay. Thank you. In your add header command, you specify the files. It's also possible to specify folders and to add this information, license information or copyright information in all files in a determined folder. Thanks.
So we haven't, so this is not staged, this question, but I was going to show something like that. You can do globbing, since it's a command line tool. Like I'm using fish shell here, so your usage may vary a little bit on other shells. But to show this, maybe let's create some Python files here in a repository under the path Python. This is just a small little function. So I need to make dir Python first, and then I can run this. And now if I run tree again, I see I have this folder called Python with a lot of Python files that all say print hello world. Now if I wanted to make all these Python files reuse compliant, I could go back here to my add header command. If again John Doe was the person who wrote these Python files and wants them to license under GPL, then I could just go Python and do a globbing like that, and this will add. There's also something maybe that I can point out at this point, that we have the helper scripts. Recently, on the 1.0 release of reuse, we added some helper scripts, which are really nice, by one of our supporters and maintainers. He added this documentation. Thanks, Nico. I think I find them really helpful. And this is also would be a great starting point if you're a more advanced user of reuse, to go to the documentation and then look at the helper scripts there. So let's run reuse lint again to see what the status here is. So it's 7 out of 10, 710. That's my birthday. How nice. But we're still not compliant because there's 3 files left. Which aren't yet properly copyrighted. So first, let's use the git ignore file, but actually use the other license that I talked about earlier, and use that for the git ignore, if I can type. Okay, and now it's only these 2. So let's take a look at the cat. Okay, it's a binary file. So we don't, so it's some kind of JPEG. So here we don't have, it's not source code, so we can't add a license header. And like Lina said, now the next best option before globbing, please don't glob, I know it's nice, is to add the .license file. So let's try doing that. So we again use the add header command. And now, is that the correct license header first? Whoops, sorry. I'm just gonna, okay, CC. I'm just using any license here that we haven't used yet to show you how reuse handles that. If we haven't downloaded the license yet, but we use it in one of our file headers. So, CC by, let's just go with that. And then everything in our images folder, we want to do that. And we see here, okay, it tells us successfully changed header of image cat license. And if you take a look at one of those files. It's basically, another file that was added to your repository that carries the licensing information and is basically just carries the extension of the file that you were licensing in the first place. So let's run reuse lint. And okay, we're not compliant with reuse. Why? Because we've used CC by 1.0 and we licensed file standard, but we missed the license text in the repository, and that's part of the reuse specification, that the reuse license text needs to be there. So at this point we can just CC roop. Ah, okay, nice. Reuse is telling us, so, okay, this doesn't work. Okay, so this is a nice edge case here. So let's go into images. Okay, we can just delete this and rerun the command with the correct license file. Did it tell me what other licenses there are? Let's use that one. Nice, okay. I'm gonna copy now, so you don't have to bear with my bad typing. And, okay. And now it told us, okay, again, and now we actually download this. Nice, and let's check the output. Yes, we are reuse compliant. Well, I mean, it should be the standard, you know, it should be standard. Okay, so where do we go from here? One thing would be to, I mean, obviously you need to push this. We have a lot of untracked stuff here, but one nice component of the project is the reuse API. We all love badges, don't we? I mean, I love badges when I'm done with the project to add the little badge. So we have an API for that, where you can register your project. Then we'll shoot you a quick email. And then we can actually do this for this repository, but because I saw that there was no reuse example. We don't have a badge here. And I think I can actually push to this, so maybe if the demo gods are with me, we can we can add the badge here, if it's not too painful. And here we don't need to add the HTTPS. It will figure that out on its own. We can subscribe to the newsletter. I'm already getting enough mails here at this point, and I'm probably writing this this information, so I don't need to sign up. Let's try this again. So our registration is successful. Now we can go into our email. I didn't plan for this. Let's go to my. I hope I'm not disclosing any private information here. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Anyhow, so I'll get an email, which then will. I need to basically confirm that I'm actually signed up for this, and then it will tell me how I can add the badge to my repository. And on each, this badge will be always up to date. It will take the latest hash from the latest commit in your repo, and then make sure that then run reuse lint on it, and then actually make sure that it's reuse compliant. Okay. Maybe I point out another couple of cool resources. So one is the tutorial. We basically did this together now, but there it's all explained again in pretty verbose. The frequently asked questions is really like, I find myself looking in there quite a lot as well. And obviously GitHub issues, GitHub pull requests of the past, if you actually want to become involved, or if you have a project that has interesting edge cases, let us know. there are loads. The helper scripts. Yeah, any more questions? Any more questions? Well, there's a lot of time left, or I don't know how much time left. 20 minutes. So, I mean, you could, it's already late, I know. We have all had a long day of conference behind us. Yes, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah?
I forgot to push one file, so it's reuse non-compliant in the badge. How can I rerun the, or shall I rerun the check for when I fix the non-compliance?
I mean, first fix the non-compliance,
of course,
and then it will. I think on each, it will just periodically check. Should yeah.
I can confirm because I've tried it.
Yeah, you need to wait some minutes. Stay tuned for some radical improvements to the performance of this API. It's currently a single-threaded sequential execution. It's not perfect. It's getting better. Bear with us. We're gonna maybe one more thing since I have time. And yeah, Lina.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking maybe you could show us a little bit about this pre-commit hook, which is super cool.
I just read your mind. So yeah, you can actually so we're compliant here. So let's use a pre-commit hook to make sure that before every commit, we're reuse lint is run, and if it exits with a 0 exit code, then we can't commit. So that's cool. If you really want to enforce reuse compliance. So for this, we need to add a file here. I think it's in here. The pre-commit hook, if I'm not, yes. So, and we need to call it pre-commit config.yaml. Yes. Don't need a language server for this file. Okay, so we added this. And now we need to install. And okay, now let's push some stuff. So let's track this, or let's commit rather. And now the commit hook runs and runs. It runs. Okay, so why did it fail? Exactly. So yes, we added a new file which misses the header. So let's get out here. Actually, again, I would go with CC0 here. And let's see. Let's stage this and try to commit again. Ah, nice. We can commit. Okay. Okay. And yep.
What do I have to add? I just made my thing reuse compliant. Could you just say what file I need to add to my project so I can add this each time I'm committing?
Yeah. So that's not, we haven't, let me phrase it like this. So we have so far haven't implemented a lot of automation features where you could, like, so for example, you could think about just a reuse config, you know, where you put your name and your the license that you want to publish things under, and then just run that every time you add a new file. There's one command that I can show you that I sometimes use when I'm working with a Grius project. It's basically, you're basically just using the power of the shell here. So let's first create a new file. Okay, good enough. Reuse lint, okay, we're not compliant again. And now we can reuse add header. And you can alias that to whatever you want. What I'm gonna type now. So it's basically this. Let me go through it. So basically so here's a print format, which is a function in Fish, but there's similar, like you can just do string interpolation in Bash, or command substitution rather, for the same effect. So basically take my username and substitute it here, and then take my in git configured user email and put it here, and add the license that I want to add. I could also put that in an environment variable if I wanted to, for example. And then here I'm actually, this gives me all the files that are staged, but only the name, so the path of the files that are staged. And then I can also pass, because this is a txt file that I just staged, it won't know which particular style because txt can print anything. So I'm just saying, okay, like, do a Python style. Let's run this. Following arguments are required. So this didn't work. So why? Because I didn't stage it. And now this should, and now it successfully changed the header of.
And when you run a commit, then your reuse thing checks whether everything is fine.
That works done by the pre-commit hook. Yeah, before I commit, I can't commit basically until, like now in this setup, I won't be able to commit if there's anything wrong. If the repo isn't reuse compliant, I won't be able to commit with this hook. Right?
So only the things that are staged.
That's how pre-commit works. Yeah, it only considers the things that are staged.
That's good.
And if I think look into the documentation of pre-commit. It's pretty cool, and it's very helpful for this kind of task. I mean, you won't be able to push anything to the repo which isn't staged beforehand. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
And have you ever thought about machine readable output for the linter? Because
yes.
for large projects, maybe some automation would be needed when a lot of files are added, and so you can automate things.
I'm trying to make some time next week.
Okay.
No, it's definitely on the roadmap.
Okay, it's a kind of JSON file or something.
Exactly. Yeah, we're imagining something like this. That's just JSON, and then it gives you a nice JSON with a version.
So I can create a script to automate.
Exactly. Yeah, and then basically give you this kind of license. We already have this SPDX command, which gives you
I know that,
bill of materials, software bill of materials in SPDX format. That's cool, and reuse lint will give you. We are trying to progressively add this kind of --JSON to the entire tool, so that every command will also be easily, the output of every command will be easily machine readable, so that you can plug it into your infrastructure and as you see fit. We think that's on the roadmap and it's coming soon.
Yeah. May I? Is there a merge request or something, or
just not yet? No, but it shouldn't be
because
trademark. It shouldn't be too hard.
So we will need that in our project, so maybe we could just make some suggestions or.
Yeah, we can exchange. I'll stick around and we can exchange. Yeah, it's always cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think this is more for the lawyers, but we have a few here. So, how much will a lawyer trust the SPDX IDs added in source code, as opposed to performing a source code scan. Would you need to do both, or can we fully trust the SPDX IDs? Yeah, okay. Sorry.
It depends. After the laughter, I will basically tend to trust the reuse because the users make an effort. There are cases where licensing information are inconsistent, and this is a problem. I think the best doing a scan the traditional way. I mean. By scanning the licensing text, and if it's consistent, okay, no problem. If it's inconsistent, then we have a problem. Of course, depending also on how many of these files yours. I mean, it's a problem of also of resources, but yeah, in theory, you should trust licensing information only if it's consistent. If it's reuse compliant, it should be consistent because otherwise, but yeah, you never know. So if you have a double confirmation, that's double sure. If you have an inconsistency, you have a hell of a problem, and you need, the only way to solve it is to upstream the issue to the software holder, because they are the only one who can. Of course, you can risk and say, I trust this more, or I trust that more, but at the end of the day, you're unsure, and uncertainty kills you.
Just one practical case. For instance, if you use Fossology, you have this checker, you have the reuse agent that can apply a decision if the reuse finding kind of doesn't conflict with any other finding of license scanners. But you can have corner cases, because for instance in Linux kernel we found a lot of BSD license file, but the SPDX tag was GPL2. Yeah. And that is basically correct, because the outbound license is GPL2 and the inbound license is BSD. Okay, it depends. but again, we didn't flag that as a mistake, because there is, of course, it's a corner case. Yeah. So there is no way of saying, okay, this file was BSD, but in this context is relicensed under GPL. Yeah. And yeah, but
and also just maybe to frame the scope again of the CLI tool, it's to make it easier to conform with the reuse spec, not more. Yeah. You know, so it's also a little bit, the scope is just limited, you know, and there are other tools for other parts of the chain. Yeah, or maybe when we have pizza, we can discuss this in more detail. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're done. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Linus.
Thanks.
We'll call an end to today's legal education track. Thank you all for coming. I hope this was useful for you in some way. And yeah, thanks. Have a good rest of the